Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Art Lounge Alley. This is the project stream. This is part 80. And here is what I'm going to be working on today. It's a continuation of one of my favorite paintings by Jacques-Louis David. It is called The Death of Socrates. It's an old story about a philosopher who questioned everything. In fact, he was responsible for what is now known as the Socratic method, which is questioning things to find out the truth. So endless questions in order to eventually arrive to some sort of conclusion, or to really dig deep and find the true meaning behind something, or discover something new, Anyways, the story goes that he was questioning authority, he was questioning a lot of people who considered themselves to be knowledgeable, only to find out that they're not really that knowledgeable about what they're talking about, and they're just kind of spreading around a lot of bullshit. And that didn't sit well with a lot of people. A lot of people got infuriated. They reported him to the Republic, basically, at the time. And the Republic didn't take kindly to what he was talking about, what he was saying, that he was questioning all these things that have been put into place as law. And he was waking up a lot of people, basically, by questioning all this stuff. And that created a lot of problems. So they told him, look, you either cut it out, or you're going to be punished by death, basically. And he said, well, if it's a life that I cannot question, it's a life not worth living. And here you see him. Well, actually, let me show you the original, because this is my study. This is the original here, and he is surrounded by all the people who admired him, who followed him, who studied with him. And you got one of the most famous ones, Plato, all the way at the left side, sitting on what looks like a brick, I guess, by the bedside, and just kind of taking in what is going on now. They're going to lose a friend, they're going to lose a mentor, I guess, to this unfortunate and stupid reality. So one of them is giving Socrates, who's in the middle, the cup of hemlock, which is poison. There's a lot more on it. It's actually really interesting. Socrates is also a very interesting character, so I encourage you guys to do a little digging and find out more. But I absolutely love this painting. I had the opportunity to see it at the Met in New York. Huge painting, and incredible amount of work in there. Like, just zooming it in, I think you could even see so by, like, this is a really good photo, and you could just see how, even really zoomed in, just how much there's going on over there with all these folds, and how much variation there is in color and tone. That's absolutely incredible. I really like how he paints skin. Like, he captures like all the different shades there as well. Like, you could see that bluish purple sort of by the ankles there, and around the toes there's, like, I guess more vibrance there. Towards the tips, I think that's really unique. He captures like all the skin tones so well, blends them in so well. There's some reds, there's some yellows and oranges and whites. Really, really well done. And of course, paying attention to all these little folds as well. But just how he renders skin is incredible. Especially using oils. Oil is really complicated. And knowing how to mix those colors well together to create such an excellent result. He was one of the best painters of that time period. But yeah, you could see, just zoomed in, how much detail there is, how much there's going on. What the expressions are like, the body language. And also these characters and back over here. So it's a really cool photo, actually, well done, high quality photo, but it's still nothing like actually being at the museum and looking at this piece of work. And it's cool to be in a presence of something that's old. Like, this is probably 1800s, late 1800s, maybe late 1700s. But just to be in the presence of something, and it's the remains of the artist, basically. It's not a conglomeration of artists that created this. It's one artist, and it's his brushstrokes, and it's still his presence through those brushstrokes, that lives on to modern day. And there's nothing that is there hasn't been much that changed in the painting. I don't know if they've done any like retouching or if they've added protective layers or something, but even then, like majority, for the most part, I mean, all of it is just his work, so he's still present to this day. So it's kind of cool to be in a presence of it, just being there. You're it's kind of like this time warp, you're existing in modern day, but at the same time, the past of the 1800s or 1700s is there with you in modern day. It's weird. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's a pretty trippy experience. It's one of the reasons why I really love going to the museums, because it is kind of like, traveling back in time a little bit, or being in a presence of the past. So anyways, enough about that. I'm continuing on with it today. I'm going to be doing more digital oil painting. I'm actually really enjoying what the texture is like. Coming from Clip Studio Paint. I didn't think it would be as good, actually. I started this back when I had Photoshop. I didn't even use Clip Studio Paint, and I remember I had to create brushes in order to emulate what oil painting is like. So now that I took a break, I could actually notice some mistakes, mistakes when it comes to the angle of certain things. Now I really want to create as much of, like, get it down as close to the original as possible. Like, that's kind of the goal here. I want to train my hand-eye coordination. I want to train my attention to detail and really refine my my ability to see it. So I don't want to compromise. I don't want to be like, well, that's close enough. I really want to get things down to the nitty-gritty details even. So I suspect this is going to take me some time, and it's something that I might have to invest I think this is just yeah, it's gonna take a bit. If I'm just doing it on stream, it's gonna take a while, so I gotta find some extra time, which is what the problem really is, to be able to tackle it off stream and get more done. There's just so much. But I think I thought about this today, actually, and I think what I'm going to be doing is just getting as much of it done as possible all around. I don't want to spend too much time perfecting Play-Doh, for example. I'm just going to start moving on to other parts of the painting and refining it, because as you can see, there's quite a bit to go. Like, there's Socrates himself, there's like all the details for the bricks as well that I'm going to be doing, and each of those characters, they also have so much detail, especially when it comes to their hair and such. So I'm just going to keep moving on, keep moving through it until everything is pretty much in place, and then just adjust things as I go to get things going. because otherwise it just feels like I'm forever going to be working on one person. As I mentioned, taking a break allows you to come back and look at it with fresh eyes, as if you're looking at it for the very first time, because as you're painting, your eye, or drawing even, your eye just gets used to certain things. I want to say it's kind of similar to something like smell. Like there are certain things that you get used to smelling and that only other people are able to recognize. Like there's been times where I went to people's houses and I would smell a certain thing and I would ask them about it and they're like, oh, I don't smell anything. And then surely enough, if I spend enough time there, it's not as potent as when I first started, when I first came in. So it kind of works the same way with like drawing. You just get used to seeing certain things, and then your eye just kind of gets used to it, and you miss out on little details here and there. But then when you take a break, you step away, or even if you use like certain techniques, like there are certain techniques that a lot of artists use, which is if it's digital, they flip the canvas. They flip it. I'm gonna do it real quick, actually. I kind of wonder what that's gonna do. So I'm gonna flip it horizontally. And that kind of snaps people out of that mode, and it brings it back to like the same fresh perspective. Actually a different way of doing it. Yeah, now I can see the whole image. And if you're working off of a reference, you want to do that with the reference as well. So you want to flip both of them in the same direction. And that will kind of like give you some perspective, and you can be like, oh, there's this that's off, there's this, that, and the other. It's looking all right. I'm sure if I spent enough time analyzing the differences, I could notice it. But for now, I'm gonna say it's okay, and I'm gonna just move on to other features on Play-Doh. Like I've yet to define his feet, I've yet to define his hands, and all these folds. I actually did some surgery last time, so now I gotta like redefine these folds. I'm not gonna worry about the color as much. Alright, so flippity flip. Flip it back to where it was. Some chains here. I still find it so insane that that's what people would do back in the day for such things. I mean, it's still happening now. It's absurd on what's going on now. Like in Iran especially, there were some people who were hung. Like, who does that? It's like medieval times or something, and people are bringing that back. Which just shows how crazy the people who are in control are. And they've become so delusional. They've become so immune to any sort of repercussion. And the fact that they have so much money just made them sociopathic. Like, they just don't care about repercussions. Don't matter to them because they know they could buy themselves out of anything. So it brings about this like sociopathic sort of behavior, and a lot of it is delusion as well. They're just doing things, and it's as if though they're living in some sort of movie, playing with people's lives, hanging them, beating people for protesting. I mean, I've also been on a Game of Thrones binge. I've just been rewatching that series. Absolutely love it. It's so much fun. But there was, at the very beginning, the first episode where Ned Stark offs one of the Watchers, I guess, one of the Watchers. He offs their head because they abandoned their post, and I was like, man, that's so savage. That's such an insane thing to murder somebody where they don't know what's going to happen. Is it really reasonable to send somebody into, or to just completely to kill them, knowing that they might not have another chance to experience life? They might not have a chance to live again. So that was it. Was that punishment actually just? To off somebody because they abandoned their post? That's absurd. Maybe like a child murderer, right? Or a child rapist. Like, absolutely, I wouldn't be like, poor guy, he's never gonna... That's a crazy person. It's disgusting what they've done. They knew that they were doing something that really was awful. They chose that. So I'm a little bit less sympathetic when it comes to that. But for like abandoning your post, not wearing a hijab, not wearing some sort of clothing, and then you murder somebody for that, you're absolutely a crazy person. Like, those people need to be booted and never given any sort of authority on action or anything to do with like people or their lives or anything like that. There's a bunch of mental patients running the world around. There's people who like literally are mentally sick. They have some sort of neurological disorder. And I don't think that it's only like, I don't think it's like some sort of condition, that's inherent or something. There's definitely that as well. That's definitely present, but I think people can develop it from not checking themselves, not recognizing what the reality is. As I mentioned, like becoming incredibly rich, I think makes people very delusional. And it's not about being rich. That's the problem. It's the fact that people don't recognize value anymore of anything. This idea of thinking that they're completely immune because they have something that everybody wants, which is money. They could basically do whatever they want. So is it really the money, or is it the person has always been susceptible to corruption? Is it the fact that society values money so much that whoever gets it, society kind of enables them because they're at awe at the fact that they're so rich and successful, and the fact that there's that in play that enables them to continue to behave like psychos. So yeah, I don't really think that it's only like inherent disorder. That's something that comes from their parents. I think it also can be enabled by society. It could be enabled by the choices that people make in order to do that. I mean, this is a perfect painting to represent that in a sense. There's somebody who's living their life, is very clever, is very thought-provoking, and because of that, he was sentenced to death. Like, they killed him for it. That's insane. That's a crazy person thing to do. And I think people really have to start thinking about that more, you know, this idea of like, what is sane and what's insane? You know, if we're going to lock up a person for murdering somebody, right? Why aren't we locking up someone who is creating genocides? Like one person killing one person, or one person killing millions of people? What's worse? You know, like, I don't think, if people are going to be outraged, you know, there's like this whole like Jeffrey Dahmer thing where everybody's like, oh, what a fucking horrible person, this is insane, and blah 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 blah. Without a doubt, of course, you know, that person was, but what they're claiming to be insane and disgusting and horrible is the fact that they were committing these awful things, murdering people, for pleasure, you know, for whatever it was, whether it was pleasure or whether it was power, right? They thought that they were doing some sort of godly work, you know, so that's part of being crazy. That's part of being delusional. And that's the same reason that you see these politicians doing it. They think they're doing some godly work, or they think that they're godly, you know, that they're these God-given gifts to society, and the choices they make are infallible, and therefore it's not wrong. It's the same sort of symptoms, same level of insanity, except one person is killing much less people, you know, like the Jeffrey Dahmer types. They're killing much less than as opposed to these political war criminals, these people who are enabling war crimes. Like, for example, Charles Manson, right? He didn't commit the crimes. He told people to do it. So what's the difference between him and somebody who's like a politician and he's telling people to go and bomb cities and murder people? You know, what's the difference between that and somebody who's telling people, go back to work and catch a killer virus and kill yourself so that I can make more money? My company can make more money, or my friends can make more money. That sounds crazy to me. Sounds like a psycho. But if nobody keeps them in check, right? If like people aren't recognizing it and saying like, hey, that's crazy. Like, get this guy out of there. And instead people are like, well, he has a lot of money, so I guess it's okay. You know, that's also a little bit crazy. What kind of reasoning is that? That's ridiculous. I think people really have to start paying attention to these things, because it shapes the future. You know, it shapes what becomes normal, in a sense, what becomes loud. And then if more people start to do those things, like, well, if it's normal to do that, then I can do this, you know, and then they start doing things. And then before you know it, there's going to be another pandemic, you know, because people are going to be doing more and more crazy stuff. That's going to create diseases that's going to create more wars that create more diseases. Like, if you think about the stuff that people had to eat during some of these wars in history, it was awful. Like, people were getting sick left and right. And I think in a lot of cases, you know, one of my theories is, when it comes to wars, is that it's just another way of downsizing population while also profiting from those wars. So there are people who are just saying, you're fighting for our country, but what they're really saying is like, hey, we're trying to get rid of people here, you know, go out there and make us money with these wars. You know, then they label them heroes, and of course we see what they do with heroes. They just give them diseases instead of raises. So it's not so much that they actually care and they're proud. It's just this agenda that they have. And yeah, if you just do a little bit of digging and see like what sort of food people were given at the time, how they were treated, they didn't care. They were basically there to die for other people's profits, for other people's egos. You know, that's what a lot of these other ones are, these soldiers are doing. They're killing themselves off for other people's egos. It's not because, you know, they're protecting somebody. That person isn't even anywhere close to the battle zone or having to deal with any of the dangers that come with it. They're sitting comfortably in their rich mansions, doing all sorts of disgusting stuff. To the economy, to the people, to whatever. While these poor kids, basically, because they're usually in their like 20s or late teens or whatever, are going off and killing themselves, coming back with less limbs. And what do they get for it? Nothing. Some stupid title that doesn't even help them create a better future for themselves, and a bunch of PTSD. And they're going out there and they're murdering strangers. Like it's not like they know these kids that they're killing. There's nothing, like they're completely completely unaware of who the person is in a plane, who the person is in a car, who the person is on the bridge, and they just off them. You know, so it's a mental sickness. You know, it's something, as I mentioned, that can come from conditioning, that can come from interaction, how they're being treated, what they're being told, you know, and instantly that shifts people's behaviors. So we got to think about it. What's the difference between Charles Manson, for example, and these political war criminals and these like politicians who are doing this to society, basically? What's the difference there? I don't see much of it, aside from the fact that politicians are committing even worse crimes. And it's something that's known in psychology. There's been a test that kind of like examined this phenomenon, and has to do with like people being susceptible to authoritarian sort of behavior. It's called the Milgram experiment. It's an actual experiment that happened back in the day where they had a bunch of people come in. I'm guessing that they were paid for it. You know, it's one of the things where they were saying like, okay, if you conduct this, we're gonna give you X amount for doing it. You just have to follow these instructions. So they got a bunch of people in. They sat them down in this office, and it wasn't like these people were who hired them to do it, that they were like well trained and they were professionals or any of that sort of thing. And that's one of the reasons why this experiment ended up being what it was, is that they just had these regular people come in, and they were just carrying clipboards that didn't even have anything written on them. They were wearing white lab coats, and they sat down the people, the volunteers, and they said, okay, so we got one person in one room, in the other room rather, and every time you press this button, they're going to receive a shock, a certain level of shock. So we need you to press this button. So the person would look at them apprehensively, and then they would do it. They would press the button, and then they would hear on the other side a scream. Now, there wasn't really anybody there. It was just somebody who was like, you know, pretending to pretending to feel pain and they were screaming, or they had some sort of recording or something. One of those things. Anyways, it wasn't real. The experiment wasn't real. But it sounded like it. There was no way for the person to verify. They didn't know that's what was going to happen when they sat down to do it. So then they would say, okay, well, we need to up the voltage now. And they would up the voltage and they would be like, okay, we need you to press a button again. And then the person would, just kind of apprehensively like look and be like, are they okay? And it's like, well, we just need you to do this. So please press the button. And then the person would go and they would press the button and then the scream would get louder. And they're like, okay, so now we need to up the voltage again and you deliver that shock. And the person would be like, well, is it going to be safe? And they're like, well, it's really important that you just deliver this shock. So please press the button. And then the person would go and they would press the button again. And this time the scream was like agony. Like the person sounded like they were in total agony. But because of this, this idea that there's a person standing there and they're presenting themselves to be professional because of their appearance, because of what they were wearing. They were wearing a lab coat and they also had this clipboard, so that meant that they knew what they were doing, when that wasn't the case at all. So you could see how Socrates would have been really useful in this scenario, and they would question all these things like, hey, what kind of profession do you have? Like, is this person going to be okay? Are you sure that this is safe? And just incessantly continue to question until they get an answer. But instead, a lot of them would just press the button, and have that shock delivered to the person on the other side. Person, quote unquote, on the other side. Some people actually walked away from it. There were some people who were like, no, I'm not doing it. This is ridiculous. The smart people who actually had a conscience that said like, hey, that's more important to me than whatever this person's trying to achieve. Like, I don't want to continuously deliver something that could end up being fatal and killing this person. I don't want that. I don't want to be responsible for that. I don't want to be the person to do it. But a lot of other people were just doing as they were told, despite of what the repercussions of it would be, or like what the results would be of it. They didn't question it. But that's kind of like what's going on, basically. It's the Milgram experiment that's happening in all these countries where people are going out and bombing places. They're actually dropping bombs, as opposed to being like, no, I'm not going to do that. Or, staging something and pretending as if though that was done, or something is wrong, or whatever it is. Like, recognizing like, hey, it's not them. It's not these politicians who are telling me to do it who are killing these people. It's me. I'm the one who's going out there. I'm pulling the trigger. I'm pressing the button and, bombing these places. So if like people recognize that they're in control of themselves, that there are people who have a conscience, and just not do it, we would have much better world conditions. Like, wherever you are, whatever country you're in, it's not the politicians who are pulling the trigger, it's the people, the soldiers, And it's an ego boost for those nut jobs, because they're like, look at how influential I am. I could tell somebody to go and kill others, and they'll do it. It's sickness. Tell me that doesn't sound like a sick, insane person. That's like a Manson, basically. Charles Manson right there. And a lot of these people end up looking at as like a presidency an opportunity to kill and be okay. They're like, oh, if I wanted to murder, I just have to become a president. If I wanted to get off on murders, if I wanted to get off on killing people or torturing and abusing people, I have to become president. And that's such an insane thing. Like, that's what you do with your achievement, rather than really creating a new society that is progressive and functioning and figuring how to deal with problems in a progressive way. as opposed to like murdering a bunch of people. Yeah, wild stuff, man. This is why I believe that money doesn't belong in politics. Like, I'm not saying don't live in a monetary society. Like, I think a monetary system is needed, but once again, I don't think capitalism is the be-all end-all for monetary systems. It's a monetary system. It's just like a branch of things. It's similar to like art. If you're gonna say art, you're not gonna it doesn't mean everything. It's just like painting is part of art. Playing music is part of art. So just substitute those things. Like the monetary system is basically this concept of art. And what you choose, let's say music, just as an example, would be like capitalism, and poetry would be like communism, so they're just branches of a political system. So the same way as capitalism is a branch of monetary system. So yeah, if it's not capitalism, it doesn't mean that all monetary systems are bad. Or it's either a monetary system or it's socialism or everything is free, basically. No, there's other monetary systems that can be used instead. Progressive monetary systems that have accountability, have limitations to what you could do with money. Just because you have it doesn't mean you could do whatever you want. That sort of system, a system that takes into account the environment, takes into account social structure, how people interact with each other, what that's like. It shouldn't, instead of like what capitalism does, is basically like if you have money, you could say, do, and act however you feel like. It doesn't matter. You don't have to take into account any of those things. You don't have to think about the environment. You don't have to think about how you treat people. You don't have to think about the future of anything other than yourself. Like, that's basically capitalism for you. And it proved itself to be unsustainable for a very long time now. And it's just creating destruction. It's just creating wars. It's just creating more problems, as opposed to solving any of them. It's not there for solving anything. It's just there to make people rich. And that's pretty much it. And that's not a sustainable system. That's not a system that's going to perpetuate civilization. It's actually just going to bring it closer and closer towards complete destruction. Considering all that stuff, as you could see, just people doing whatever they want, saying whatever they want, and everybody praising them because they're like, oh, he has money, he's successful. Oh, he's rich. That means they know what they're doing. It's so crazy. There's a bunch of people who got rich from doing awful things. Sex trafficking, drug trafficking. They get a bunch of money and they move on to doing other things that are also awful, and they get people positions to do things to protect their interests while having things veiled, pretending as if though they don't do any of those things behind closed doors. Like perfect example is like Groucho Marx and Weinstein, like all those characters, like they're doing disgusting, terrible things behind closed doors. But prior to that, everybody's praising them, thinking that these are amazing people, and they did it through hard work and did things the right way or whatever else. Meanwhile, they're doing all this like disgusting, terrible stuff behind closed doors. And people are like, well, why are things so terrible? Because a lot of people, instead of like rising up against it and demanding new systems, demanding new change in laws and regulations, and people who are in power, they're enabling it by praising it, by going along with it, you know, instead of revolting. Making excuses and being like, well, you know, you got to grow up sometime, and that's just a way to alleviate their sense of responsibility, or the fact that they failed to take any action. So the way they pacify themselves is like, well, I guess I grew up and I stopped thinking about those things and making them important, and that's why the pandemic happened, because a lot of people just chose to use that excuse or bought into that excuse that was laid on them through like fascists, basically a bunch of people who wanted that corruption, who wanted those kind of things to happen, and they knew how to creep into people's minds psychologically and make them feel powerless to do anything, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's generational for sure. And as I mentioned, it's not like these are teenagers who are telling these adults to go out there and do all these things and believe in these fascist values and racist points of views and all that stuff. It's adults. Adults are doing that to kids. You know, adults are telling them to behave this way. Adults are the ones who are creating sex trafficking, drug trafficking, and all this other stuff. So, who really needs to grow up there? I don't think that age means somebody's wiser. It doesn't really. It just means like a person who is wise is wiser. A person who chooses to follow reason and logic and not just talk about it, not just preach it to other people, but actually follow it themselves. You know, be that example. Those are the wiser people. You know, there's Nazis who are like 50, 60 years old. Does that make them right because they're older? Absolutely not. That's just kind of like the example there. It just comes down to education and moral values, if you have any. You know, if you do actually have any values that you follow. Not just preach, because it's a lot easier for people to point the finger than it is to actually look at themselves and be like, hey, do I actually follow any of the things that I am condemning others for? Or am I just an insane hypocrite? Which basically which is basically like the right wing, insane hypocrites. And it's not just in the States, it's like every country. Notice every country has this sort of dichotomy. You know, there are people who share those kind of things, right? Like whether it's India or China or America or Africa or whatever, Italy or France, they have people who very much act like what in the States people would say right-wingers are. So isn't that fascinating? The fact that all these countries claim to be so different from one another and criticize each other, but they have very similar social structure. China being an authoritarian country, right? They're having a dictatorship, basically, and people are in the States criticizing China and being like, oh, they're so blah, 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 and that country has like dictatorship. Meanwhile, there's an entire party that acts just like the dictatorship that's over there, that wants to create scenarios and behaviors and, having zero accountability while demanding it from everybody. Talking about corruption, meanwhile doing a bunch of corrupt things themselves. And to me, that just says there's something else in play here. It's not about nationality. It's not about geographical location. It's not about any of those things. It has to do with psychology. I think a lot of it has to do with something I call brat syndrome. Like, I think it's something that really develops at a young age. If you think about kids who escape responsibility, right? When they lie to their parents and they get away with it, what do? They laugh about it, right? There's a little bit of glee there that they're so happy that they got away from the responsibility. They were able to fool their parents. The better they get at that, the more and more crazy their behavior becomes. They start pushing the limitations. What if I do this? Am I going to get away with it? And then they get away with it and they, again, just like kid, laugh about it. So that brings on sociopathic behaviors, and it gets worse and worse and worse as they get older. The more things that they start doing, knowing that they could get away with this, they can get away with that, so on and so forth. And if nobody's there to check it, nobody's there to say, like, no, you're not getting away with this. Like, I've noticed that I don't care how much money you got. You're going to jail for doing this stuff. If you don't care about anybody other than yourself, there are repercussions, guys. Everybody else wants to also enjoy themselves, and you're just stomping that out for the sake of this like mental disorder of how much you can get away with. But anyways, that personality is present everywhere. There are a bunch of people who have that sort of upbringing or who have that sort of environment. Kids who always got their way, and when they don't get their way, they throw temper tantrums and they freak the fuck out and they do some crazy stuff in order to get their way. They end up being adults. If nobody checks them or teaches them how to respect people's boundaries, how to appreciate others or whatever. It's not like they snap out of it. One day they're just like, oh, wait, I shouldn't do that anymore. No, they've been doing it for so long that all they're focusing on is like, hey, can I get away with more stuff? Oh, I'm good at lying now because I've been doing it for so many years. Well, what can I get away with when I'm doing this or that? Yeah, so I call that brat syndrome. They turn into brats, and it gets worse and worse as they get older. And they do crazier and crazier things. And then they become presidents, and then they create wars, and they laugh about the fact that they were able to convince people, lie and manipulate them to go out and murder others all around the world. They're creating all this stuff that's rippling through around the world, and they laugh about it. Just like a kid who gets away with a bunch of stuff that their parents told them not to do. So I'm absolutely convinced that that's what's going on around the world. Why there's these similarities? Why are places that deem themselves to be so different having the same sort of personalities around there? In India, it's the same idea. There's a bunch of people who are acting the same way. They call themselves conservatives. But then if you pay attention to what they're doing, they're completely contradicting any of the things that they condemn others for, what they abuse others for. Same exact behavior. Different country, right? Different culture, supposedly. Same sort of behavior. So it's not about nationality. It's not about culture. It has to do with this sort of thing that happens psychologically to kids with specific type of upbringing, specific type of environments. And I think it's multiple. I don't think it's just that, the kids who are lying through their entire life and getting away with it and getting good at it. I think there's multiple avenues. So there's kids who are brought in really abusive environments. And because of that, they pass it on to other people, which allows them to keep stomping on everybody around until they get what they want. The same way the parents treat them, so there's that avenue. There's like multiple avenues in order to get to that state, get to that psychological deformity, I want to say. Like, that's probably not the right term for it, but yeah. So it's not just one avenue to get there. There's other ways that people develop this Brat syndrome, basically. There's people who develop it through trauma, where they become so traumatized that they start doing terrible things to others as a choice, because that's just how they've been. That's how they've been treated, so they're just like, either I treat others this way and prevent it, or I end up being in that position, so that's another route that brings about that psychosis, basically. I think it's a psychosis. It's not just, and it could be genetic as well. Some people are just genetically predisposed to be that way, but I think it's also conditional as well, like how people are being treated. As I was talking about, the idea of that psychological experiment, the Milgram experiment, that's something that just happens because of certain conditions, so it's interesting stuff to look into. If you guys have time, check out the Milgram experiment. It's interesting to read about and see what happens. There's also the idea of like cognitive dissonance, this idea that, and the backfire effect, when you prove somebody wrong and instead of them actually accepting that something is wrong, they double down and they do it even worse, or they just continue to spread false information and bullshit because they just don't want to believe that what they know is wrong. I might need to do some surgery. His foot is huge. Let me zoom out. Yeah, that foot looks pretty big. I think it just needs to be longer. Ooh. Yeah, this is what I was talking about. There's, at some point I'm gonna need to do some surgical adjustments. Maybe the guy who's holding Hemlock needs to be a little bit closer to him, because I'm paying attention to the distance between something. I was talking about before, the distance between objects. So in the I'm gonna show you guys real quick before I end the stream. So this is the original, and you could see like his foot right here, right? Like it's touching his butt basically. But like going back here, that's not really the case. So either I have to extend the leg, or the space between them here and here is too short. Or just have to, I don't know. I have to look into it a little bit more, but next time, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed all this. I had a great time talking about all that stuff, sharing it with you guys, and painting it as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you did, just remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They're both greatly appreciated by me. And make sure you come back tomorrow for a special intro. Actually, there's going to be more new content coming your way. It's going to be something that's going to take up, like, I don't know, a quarter of the stream. So I'm not going to reveal too much about it. I'm not going to talk about it too much. So make sure you tune in tomorrow to see what that is. And then also Friday, I'm going to be continuing on with Gil Elfgren's influences. I got 2 more artists to talk about, and then I'm going to show you guys more of the book. Show you Gil Elfgren's work going from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s to 70s, all the way to the 70s, and just gets better and better every decade. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you tomorrow.